All right, welcome to another episode of Warrior versus Zombie. And today I've got another amazing warrior guest, Tammy Gross. I'll introduce her to you in a second. But first, let me tell you why you're here. Success is a journey, it's not a destination. As warriors, we all have a history of ups and downs, wins and losses that are all part of making us who we are up to this point, and they provide a foundation for our path forward. In each episode, we all battle our inner zombie as well as those zombies in our world. And I interview entrepreneurs, artists, health practitioners, business owners, literally any inspired leader from all walks of life. Today's guest, Tammy Gross, is an awesome warrior. She's a #1 best-selling author, scriptpreneur, and I always have trouble saying that, award-winning screenwriter, musician, and historian. She's been editing screenplays for writers of all skill levels since 2008. And with Tammy's help, A-lister Shia LaBeouf, his autobiographical script was transformed into the compelling story that is now the award-winning film Honeyboy. After her own screenplay-turned-novel became a bestseller and was slated for mid-2022 film production by an A-list TV producer, she began working with authors and now entrepreneurs to turn their ideas, novels, and life stories into screenplays. So, Tammy Gross, welcome to Warrior versus Zombie. How are things in
I'm happy to be
Florida
here.
today?
Well, it's actually a pretty nice day in Florida, considering that it's, we're getting into that hot stuff, that really bad hot stuff, but it's a very nice day. And I'm really happy to be here. I think that this show is awesome. I think that what you do and wanting to get to the heart of it, what you call zombies, I call a mountain. It's like moving a mountain, and
Yeah.
so I love it. We're very much on the same page here.
Well, I think that's the funny thing is I like the mountains. The zombie thing. Um, the two most popular and successful types of movie franchises, you can relate to this being in that are two things: horror movies,
Yep.
and zombies. So when it occurred to me that it was all we had our warrior focus or our zombie focus, and um, I I started this. I call 2020 the beginning of the zombie apocalypse.
It
But
is,
I
and it was.
started, I started writing the book, and I came up with the idea, probably 15 years ago. So, I mean, it's been in my head. So the podcast was an outgrowth of that, wanting to have
Right.
more warrior stories, have more examples of stuff. And then now I find that I love doing the podcast. So it's a lot of fun. So
Yeah.
one of my other guests was in Florida, and I think she said, yeah, Florida weather, it's either hot or hotter. That's the
Yeah.
this time of year. So, and
Yeah.
I'm kind of feeling you right here in Dallas, Texas. By the way, it's supposed to be
Oh
100.
yeah.
It's supposed to be 104 today. So,
Yeah, you guys have
um,
got it really bad. We've got the humidity, but even right now it's a pleasant 88.
oh
So I
yeah,
mean
well
it's
that would be
it's
like a cold
cool.
front. Yeah,
Yeah.
cold. That would be a cold front. And you're like in the Orlando area, is that right? Or near
I'm in
Orlando?
Orlando. Yep, I'm
Yeah.
right here in Orlando.
Yeah. Well, that's Disney is a beautiful thing. It's I'm a big kid, so I like that. Well, let's do this. I really am very fascinated by what little I know and I've shared about your story. And so I want to give plenty of time to hear how you got from where you started to today. So let's take a quick break. We'll hear a little bit more of our theme song from Ricky Jean Wright for the audio audience of It's Not the Getting There. And we'll be right back with Tammy Gross and Warrior versus Zombie. All right, we are back, and Tammy, I am really excited to hear your story. You've got a journey that I've that kind of fascinates me. So tell me, how did you get from where you started? You get to pick where that is on your warrior journey and to where you are today.
Well, I can go way back, and I will. I'll go way back to before I was born.
Okay.
I am the daughter of a musician, and my dad, Jimmy Gross, was a favorite of Ray Kroc of McDonald's fame.
Mhm.
And before there was a Ronald McDonald or anything, Ray Kroc was hiring my dad for all sorts of things in Chicago. My dad was a Chicago band leader, and so one day he came up to him and he asked my dad if and it was shortly before I was conceived, I do believe. uh and I already had a sister who was about 2 or 3 years old at the time. And that's all relevant because Ray asked my dad if he would travel the country and be his front man, be the guy who put all the entertainment together for McDonald's and would be the face of McDonald's. In other words, he was kind of asking him to be what we now know as Ronald McDonald, but he didn't have Ronald McDonald conceived at the time, you know.
Mhm.
And my dad really agonized over that, but he actually decided to say no for a couple of reasons. One being, did he want to be under the thumb of a man of that kind of power?
Mhm.
But also because he had a growing family. They knew they were going to have at least one more kid. And I came along about a year later, I'd say, from what I understand of the timeline. And so he did say no, and which is all great. But when I heard the story, I don't know how old I was. I was probably somewhere between 7 and 12 years old, somewhere in that range. And when I heard that story, I'm like, oh, okay. Well, as a musician, I have to stick to my principles because I was becoming a musician myself, and I also wanted to be a writer at the time when I was that young. But I just all the thoughts started swirling around in my head when I heard the story, and I realized that I realize now, but I did not realize at the time that I developed from that story some kind of a poverty mentality. That
Hmm.
it's like, success is scary. So be careful, beware of success. You're a musician, you're supposed to be, humble. You're a writer, you're supposed to be humble. I mean, I just had the whole creative thing kind of hitting me there. So fast forward many, many years, I actually did become a musician. And there was always kind of like this life plan that the whole family kind of knew about or we joked about or something. I don't really know how it came about exactly, but we always said that I would sing while I was young and I would write when I'm old because we all knew I wanted to be a writer, but I had to have some life experience before I started writing. And so that was kind of my life plan. And one day I was taking kind of a break from singing because there were some things going on with where I was singing at a church and a very contemporary church. I could sing almost anything I wanted up until a certain point where things started to change. So I took a little break, and to make that story a little shorter, I basically went on vacation and found out about some female pirates that really lived 300 years ago. I was
Mhm.
at the Pirate Museum that at the time was down in Key West. It's now in St. Augustine, and I learned about Bonnie and Bonnie. I don't know why I'm saying Bonnie and Bonnie and Mary Read. They were real pirates, and when I heard about them, there was like very little information, but it was all fascinating what I did here. And I'm just like, why have I never seen a movie? Why have I never read about them? Why don't I know about these two women who were more than just pirates? They weren't just, thieves and awful people. There was like a really compelling story behind them. So I could just immediately see their entire story playing out on the screen. And apparently I turned old that day because I started researching and wanting to write their story, and I never went back to singing. I mean,
Hmm.
I don't know why. I mean, that was not a plan, but I got so involved in wanting to do that. I started researching. I traveled the world. I went all the way to the Netherlands, to England, all over England, and I went up and down the entire East Coast of America. Did a little bit of West Coast research as well, and went to the Bahamas and to Jamaica. And while I was in the Bahamas, I actually became a victim of pirate descendants. While I was at a hotel, they robbed me of about $1,700, and
Wow.
we had already had conversations, and I already knew enough about them they were all very proud. It's like, we are pirate descendants. Yeah. And they took my money, and I almost couldn't get to Jamaica, and I was being chased by hurricanes. So I had my own adventure. So I was like starting to realize, okay, it's a pretty adventurous life being out here in the Caribbean. And it just fueled my fire for wanting to know more about these women, to know more about all of the piracy and everything. And I discovered a lot of things along the way, but one of them was, I have to learn how to write a screenplay. Now I know how. Sorry if I'm making noise on this thing. Now I know how to tell their story. At least I'm figuring out how to tell their story, and I know a lot more about them. But how do you write a screenplay? So I suddenly found myself in a jam there, where it's like, here I have this great story, got to tell it. Not only don't know how to write a screenplay, but now I have to figure out, how would you get a screenplay into somebody's hands? How would you get it made? This is an oceany story, and those are pretty expensive.
Hmm.
And so I had some, as I call them, mountains to climb from there. But it did get me to the point where it's like, I started a screenwriting group called Orlando Screenwriters that was amazing, and that put me to where I was on the right path, and I started learning more about screenwriting, and it became my thing, and got me on the path to where I am today, where I'm helping other screenwriters.
So yeah, so I really am curious. The musician thing, for one thing, is my good friend Ricky Jean Wright, who's the singer-songwriter behind the theme song of this, wrote this song specifically after listening to me tell to my networking community and express things about the things that were important to me. And then he wrote this song, and I thought that's fascinating. And it turned out it was just in time for me to launch this podcast. So I have a license to use that. And he's a singer, and a good singer. I mean, you'll hear him on the
Hmm.
when you listen to the audio, but he really likes writing. And as your dad, your family is a musician, sometimes that can be um, a zombie, if you will, or a challenge, in that your parents,
Yeah.
your family, your friends, other people have a vision for what you should be doing with your life. Or you may have seen experiences in their lives that you didn't want to repeat, right? You said, I don't want to do that. Um, how did how would that play? I'm going from musician. It kind of almost sounded like it just happened, but what was that transition like? How did that go in your world?
Well, yes, you're very insightful about that. It definitely is a part of things, right? My dad really never saw me as having to be. In fact, he didn't even see me as having any talent, because I didn't think I had any talent when I was younger. I had some kid, when we were in some kind of a choir in fourth grade, I think it was. He turned to me and he goes, "You're tone deaf," after I had told him, "You're singing the wrong notes." And he said, "Well, you're tone deaf." And I believed him. I
Hmm.
believed him that I was tone deaf. And it took a few years before I was kind of discovered. And once I was discovered, then people were trying to make me sing all over the place. And I realized, that this weird little dream that I had was a real thing. I used to picture that if I sang, like when I was alone, walking home from, I'm sure other people can relate in some way, I would be
Hmm.
walking home alone from the bus stop to my house. And it's about 5 or 6 pretty well spaced houses that I had to pass to get to my house at that time. And there was woods on the right and houses on the left, and a big ditch on the left, that almost everybody had woods before their house as well. So it was a nice area in Highland Park, Illinois. Yes, I am from
Hmm.
Highland Park, Illinois. So there's some baggage now there, but it was a beautiful place to grow up. It's
Yeah.
still a beautiful place. It's a place that will recover from what happened on July 4th this year.
Yeah,
And
for
I would
sure.
walk home from the bus, and I would be singing, thinking I sound like Karen Carpenter, because that's who I idolize. And I
Mhm.
would picture that a producer would be like hiding in the woods, hiding behind some trees or something, and he would jump out and he'd say, "You are the most wonderful singer," and blah blah blah. And it almost sort of worked out that way, because somebody actually did hear me singing, and that was at school, and it was in junior high. And I was just messing around with some other musicians, and they were playing a silly song, and I would sing and stuff like that. And they asked me to sing for a talent show that they were going to
Mhm.
do for the first time. And that's when I discovered I can sing. And that's also when my dad discovered I could sing. So that put me on a trajectory of I now have the family behind me, because in the past, I was the noise in the background at home. We had a little baby grand piano that was never fully tuned, and I would be banging on that thing, and they'd talk about how loud I played, and I would just play the same songs over and over again, and they had learned to tune me out. So they all discovered that, wow, she has some talent, and I could present it as well. Although I had to learn quite a bit, and I learned a lot of that from my dad. So yeah, so I wasn't on any real trajectory until that happened, and that's when we realized, okay, well, you have to sing now, and then when
Mhm.
you're older. So that's probably around 13, the age of 12 or 13 is when I realized, okay, I'm going to sing when I'm young, and then I'm going to write when I'm older. And the reason I wanted to write, I had a cousin whom I had never met at that point, but she had written some children's books. Suki and the Peacock was the
Mhm.
first one, Joyce Blackburn, and she was my idol as a writer, and I loved her stories, and I wanted to do that. But I never knew if I was going to have the talent or anything. It turned out I was, good with English and everything, and I actually even became an editor. That was one of my first jobs, is working as an editor at a newspaper, local newspaper, and so I was kind of doing this parallel thing. I even started writing a book when I was about 18 or 19 or something, and just kept writing that, and took me about 30 years to finish it, but I wasn't really finishing it for anything, and it was all parallel to the music. The music was always first. And yeah, so the family was very supportive, but they also, were concerned, because they knew that, we were never financially secure as a
Mhm.
family, because musicians have to go through a lot of ups and downs, especially when they're independent, as we were.
Well, and in fact, that's all the warriors listening to this podcast, or a vast majority are, I said artists, entrepreneurs, small business
Right.
owner. I mean, everybody deals with the ups and downs of the journey,
Yeah.
and so um, it is a scary thing, and it is. And again, as an artist, whether you're a singer or an author or a painter, I've got a daughter who's a regular avid listener of the podcast, Hannah, and she's amazing, and she's really gifted artist. But making, she can paint, draw. I mean, brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Hmm.
But getting your work sold, making a living out of doing
Yeah.
that, that's a tough road. It can be you got to have things. But the fascinating thing is, as you went along, you said, you had an editor job, you had things in your journey. And if you, it's hard to see the road ahead a lot of times on your warrior journey and
Hmm.
know how it's going to play out, right? But you can always look
Yeah.
back and you can see how those dots connected, and
Exactly.
then kind of led you to where you are today. Well, that's brilliant. Well, let's do
Yeah.
this. I know there's probably more thing, when we get into
Oh,
the
there's
next segment, if
tons.
there's some things you want to tie in, we can. But I want to take another quick break, and then we come back. I want to talk about what you're doing today and kind of how that flows into um, your story, and why you're doing it, and so on. So let's take another quick break. We'll hear a little more of It's Not the Getting There from Ricky Jean Wright, and we'll be right back with Tammy Gross and Warrior versus Zombie. All right, Tammy. Well, got kind of a cool story. I love the artist journey. I love the finding your true focus and passion, getting into the writing thing. It's kind of interesting because as you told your story, what I heard was you've gone along this path and you really wanted to write, but you didn't know if you could. And that's another zombie.
Hmm.
A lot of times
Yep.
uh, we don't know the how, but the thing is, most warriors, they get in motion, right? And you start doing stuff and it unfolds before you. And all of a sudden you're on a different part of the road and you can see that a path forward. And that's the brilliance of some of the things you shared. So tell me, why are you doing what you're doing today? And, you know, I can already see some of the value you provide and so on.
Well, it's interesting because, like I said, you are very insightful. You are saying some of the things that are exactly what was going on for me. It's that, well, I mean, I call myself a scriptpreneur, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's the creative, the script part, and the preneur part, the business part.
Right.
And seeing my dad have to struggle with that was one thing. And then when I'm, now doing it, there was always some kind of business attached where either the music was the side thing that was part of what I was doing in business as an employee, almost in everything, because I did have this poverty mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Um, or once I started going out on my own, which was around 2000, I hung a shingle and an online shingle to be an arranger
Mm-hmm.
and a transcriber of music for people. And that was like a natural thing because so many people were asking me to do it since I had been doing it for years for my own team of people at
Mm-hmm.
church and in bands and in different groups that I was involved with. And so that was a natural thing, and I was starting to become a preneur. I was now an entrepreneur, an actual, I didn't have a boss. I didn't have
Mm-hmm.
somebody telling me what to do. It wasn't a side gig. And same thing happened when I started writing, and I went through that transition of like, now I want to write stories. It was a natural transition because people were asking me, please edit my screenplay, or you understand format. Because I mean, I didn't understand format at first, but I did a lot. That's one of my zombies that I had to overcome, is learning format
Mm-hmm.
and studying it and getting a mindset about it that I don't think most screenwriters, including some of the top,
Mm-hmm.
performing screenwriters, they don't fully get it because it's for the reader. And so there are a lot of people who are making a living doing it, but they don't even have a great, like if they were to just send in their script right now, maybe to a contest or something, it would probably do well and everything, but it would probably lose all these points for the format or for the way it was written in certain ways, because it's a really tough thing to really master. So once I mastered that, people were coming to me, and so I was able to change shingles. Okay, I'm not
Sure.
doing the music anymore, but I still had the mentality of like, I just need enough money to get by. That's all I need. I just want to help people. That's all I want to do. And so that was, that took a while to get over. It's only in the recent years because one of my zombies that I had to get over was illness. I
Mm-hmm.
had been doing this stuff for, since 2000. Well, 2000, March of 2000 is when I opened my first entrepreneurial doors. And in 2018, something changed and I couldn't figure out what it was. I was still doing a little bit of music, but
Mm-hmm.
that was not my focus and I really wasn't pushing it or anything. But I knew how to do SEO since 2000. I knew what I was doing to be number one in the Google rankings and to make sure that people could find me as a screenplay proofreader or screenplay editor or whatever. And and I also had some word of mouth, and I did have a reputation by then, by 2018, because I had been doing it for a few years by then. And something happened where all of a sudden I was getting, fewer and fewer clients. I was still getting my return clients, but I wasn't getting anybody new. And it took a while. It took a full 6 months before I even realized something had really changed. And I realized, oh my gosh, when I look for myself, I'm at the bottom of the page, or I'm even on page two, which is death. And especially back then.
Mm-hmm.
And then it took another 6 months for me to figure out, how do I fix this? And the way to fix it, apparently, as I was finding out, was content marketing.
Right.
And that was the killer to me because I was an hours for dollars, low income person, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I was only charging $35 an hour at the time. And which is just so sad because it takes a lot of hours to edit a screenplay or to create a chart for a music, and for whatever I was doing. It took a lot of time. So I was spending my time in my business, not on my business at all. Now, all the worry from that, before I could really start implementing everything I was learning and start doing content marketing and everything, I think all the worry, I think I made myself sick. No, I know I made myself sick actually. And I ended up in the hospital. And
Mm.
I had a stone that they had to take care of, but the way they took care of it, they even knew it was going to happen ahead of time. I uh, got pancreatitis and I
Oh,
had to deal
wow.
with pancreatitis. And I don't mind talking about my age, but I was already in my 50s by the time this happened. So it was not easy to deal with. And that's what I had to deal with is being in and out of the hospital. I was actually there for 3 months, almost died.
Wow.
um, I didn't even realize how close to death I was until kind of afterward, and it was made clear to me by doctors and stuff. Apparently one doctor came up to me whom I loved because he looked and sounded like a pirate to me. He had long hair, and he had the scrub thing on, and he had the earring, and I'm like, oh man, he's like a pirate. And but apparently he's the kind of doctor that you never see. He doesn't come up, but he needed to let me know how dire things were and how there was one thing that I was having trouble with, and that was eating. I couldn't eat while I was in the hospital. And he's like, you've got to. I know it's disgusting to you, the look of food, the taste, the smell, everything, but you've got to do it. And he was giving me numbers and everything. And that was the first time I had an inkling that this was pretty dangerous. And later I found out, ooh, if he hadn't come up, or just the fact that he came up, that tells you that you're in trouble. So without dwelling there too long, it did
Hmm.
last for a couple of years. I was in and out of the hospital. So once I was pretty much free from the hospital, which has now been about a year and a half, I think
Right.
the last time I was in the hospital was in early February of 21. I have been doing really well physically.
Mhm.
I learned how to eat again. Dang it. Too well. Uh, but I'm doing well, and I've been turning my business around and my business thinking and having an abundance mindset. And I will give a shout out to Pete Vargas. He is amazing. He brought in so many people when COVID hit.
Hmm.
So I was already kind of getting there. I didn't know I was going to go back to the hospital at that point, but he was getting me into a new mindset of abundance. It is time to start thinking about the fact that if you want to have an impact on this world, you have to have some money and some influence, and you have to be helping people in a more real way. And you can't be doing the hours for dollars because you can't get out of it if you're stuck in the hours for dollars. And so that really changed everything. He brought in like 75 people from Tony Robbins to he had major basketball players, he had major footballers, he had people who had no arms and legs who were like the most inspiring people in the world who were doing big things in the world. And so he just brought in this parade of amazing people. Um, and just really helped my mindset, and that put me on a new path, and that made me want to help people more, want to be a warrior, want to not say woe is me, I'm in the hospital or I'm sick or anything like that. Done with all of that, done with the just going to work hours for dollars thing, and wanting to truly help people and make an impact uh, in people's lives. And one of the ways that we do that is we share our stories.
Hmm.
And while I was working for, and I got sick after, I believe, yes, after I had done some work for Shia LaBeouf. But one thing that kind of brought me back to Shia LaBeouf and somebody that he actually would have known, I think, probably another big A-lister who you've never heard of. His name is Spiro Rosatos, and he is a second unit director of big, big movies, like all the car chases that you love from Fast and the Furious. That's him.
Right.
He's the one who
Oh,
did
wow.
those. The big motorcycle thing in Venom. And he worked on Transformers as a second unit director. So he's the one who gave us all those awesome scenes. Not on the same one as Shia LaBeouf, but still same franchise. And he had also a story about his life, just like Shia LaBeouf had a story about his life. And I realized these are the stories that make a difference. I wanted to know about how Spiro became to get to be a second unit director, he started out as a stunt man, but he started out as a stunt kid. And he had a
Mhm.
wonderful story, an amazing story. And that was the stuff that was hitting my heart. And I realized that's how people make impact, is they share their story. And that's my big message nowadays is share your story, change lives.
that's a great vision. That's a great reason, what I call unique reason. We all, I mean, as I always say, we all have a unique reason, a reason that I'm a Christian, by the way. So why
Hmm.
God put us on the planet, and
Yes,
why we're still here. So, you can go through your illnesses that you talked about and those kinds of things. But if he's not ready to take you out, you're going to continue on. And your goal is to overcome those things. And through that journey, I've heard even more of your story now that we took the break, about some of the zombies, the challenges you had. But the key
right.
is you're focusing forward. I also love, you talked several times about the scarcity or the mindset, and not really. And that again is a huge zombie for a lot of warriors. Is I call it, there's a miracle of margin. If you have space
Yes,
above what it takes to keep your head above water, then you can start thinking about possibilities. But when you're underwater, all you want to do is, get air. You just got to get up
exactly.
above the water. And it makes, looking for beyond the here and the now and the hour pay, getting paid by the hour. Okay, I need money. I've got to get more hours. But then as you pointed out, that consumed you in
Hmm.
the working in your business rather than on your business. And then you talked about, um, you know, the mindset. Again, we are a miraculous being. We all have a mind, body, and spirit. And
Hmm.
even you also said something else that was fascinating to me, and that is that you believe your mindset, what you were dealing with, made you sick. And I believe that is totally true,
Yeah,
because there's this thing called genetic and epigenetic, and the same people with the same genetic background, one can be totally healthy and one can be sick. Well, why is that? Because we either turn that propensity, those genes off or on. We give
right.
the through our through stress. Stress is a killer. It's just, and the
Yeah,
stress is generally in our mind. It's generally what we do. So yeah, that's all brilliant. Those are all huge warrior nuggets. And now I hear you, where you're at, you talk about telling stories, and that's another thing we're really aligned on. And that's one of
yeah.
by the way, for those listening to this podcast, Tammy's going to be doing a mastermind on August the 12th, and so you can tune back in and we'll dive a little deeper into
Yeah.
that, telling your story, scripting your story, getting your message out there. A lot of people don't understand, and that's why we do the story segment of this podcast, is because you don't want to go to the grave with your story still in you. Your story is going to inspire. And that's the thing, is people think, getting your message out, making money, building a business is all about motivating people. To me, motivation is manipulation. People
Yeah.
become inspired by, which is coming from within, they
Hmm.
become inspired from your story. So your story is
Right.
very powerful. Now, one of the things you said, and you kind of, that I want to drill a little bit, and you're going to be talking to a mastermind of entrepreneurs and artists,
Hmm.
but you work with people who have, in the media, but now you've kind of pivoted, or you're expanding your impact to dealing with entrepreneurs. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
So
I've
tell me a little
actually,
bit about that.
yeah, it's sort of a blend is what's happening. For the
Mhm.
last, probably 6 to 8 months, I have really been concentrating on, well, for one thing, I like speaking. I'm having fun speaking,
Mhm.
which is so weird because when I was a singer, I had a microphone. I had my little, well, actually, I had my SM58 Shure, but I had my little golden type microphone to me. And a microphone is for singing. And that was my thing from the stage when we would do sound checks. It's like they would ask me to talk and do a check. And I'm like, this is the only time you're going to hear me talk because I'm not going to talk on stage. And microphones are for singing, not for talking. And I have obviously flipped that around quite a bit because
Mhm.
I have been really having fun because exactly of everything that you just said. it's not only inspiring to be sharing your story and to want to help people in that way, but also it's empowering.
Mhm.
One of the things, or one of the many things that I had to overcome, or I should put it this way, many of the things that I had to overcome, all of my little zombies and everything, were things that I had to figure out a simplification for.
Mm.
And it's like, because screenwriting can be very complicated. If you get into it too much and you don't get the right mindset, format can just overwhelm you. And it can be so hard when really it's just four little elements is all that format is. And so it's been my mission, I guess you could say, even when I was doing music, because I was doing arrangements, but I was doing very special kinds of arrangements that were for all musicians, for a virtuoso who could read every note and could do everything on site, to the person who just knew a few chords on the guitar maybe or
Mhm.
something. And these charts were great because they worked for everybody. It had some notes, it had some chords, it had some rhythms, but it was something that even if you didn't read music, you could read this. And that has been like a theme in my life, is that I like to simplify things so that I can figure it out, I can do it to the best of my ability. And then I love to help other people do the same thing, figure out that, or at least see it, what I've already figured out, or maybe they can even help me figure out how to make it even simpler. And
Mm.
that's why I do what I do, is that I try to empower people so that if they are inspired to tell their story, they can do it and they don't have to feel overwhelmed by, okay, I have to do the hero's journey. So where's the elixir part and where's that weird word that I can never remember that
Yeah, give me
nobody
the
uses in English,
character arc
you
of
know?
this, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
No,
it's like it can be so complicated, and I've just, and my big thing is paring it down to something powerful and simple. And that's
yeah.
what I do.
And that's brilliant. And it's obvious your journey has informed what you do today. Um, the thing is, we're so much more aligned than we'll even have time to talk about here, because
True.
what you don't know about me is I sang in coffee houses and bars. I don't have any formal music
Yeah.
training. I've always worked with musicians. I love music. As I always say, music is my life. It's not my livelihood. My
Right.
favorite we did a whole set of Harry Chapin every time I did it, and he's a storyteller song,
Major storyteller.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and it's brilliant, and I love it, and those are the ones I like the best. And it does naturally flow to uh, wanting to get people's story out. And then
Yeah.
I can hear your inspiration and desire to change the world through stories. And
Yeah.
that's the thing, is I wanted to sing mainly because I want the stories that Harry Chapin would tell through his song inspired me. They were like a
Yeah.
soundtrack a lot of times to my own life, and I thought, I want to do
Yeah.
that. I want to have that on other people, which is kind of the, again, very similar to what you said. Well, we could go on and on. Let me do this.
Good.
Let's let's take one more quick break. And there's so many things you've hit on here that we could drill in. We may have to have another episode, but what I want to do is take a break, and when we come back, I want to hear two things. I'm going to want to hear, if we take away anything from this podcast, what would you want us to take away? Could be from your story, could be anything. And then when I want to know how we can stay in touch with you aside from on the Be Connected
Sure.
platform and whatever. Okay, so let's take a quick break, hear a little more Ricky Jean Wright, uh, and we'll be right back with Warrior versus Zombie and Tammy Gross. All right. Brilliant, inspiring, fun, all those things all wrapped into one. So I gave you a heads up. I know where we're going. So tell me, if we take away anything from this podcast, what would you want us to take away?
I think there's two things, and I think I've said them pretty succinctly, but they're worth repeating, especially the last thing. But the first thing is, when you're overwhelmed, especially if you're a creative, but no matter what you're doing, but if you're overwhelmed, find a simpler path. That's so key, that you've got to simplify. Otherwise, you'll be paralyzed, and you can't move forward when you're just facing so many things that you've got to hit on. And the big thing is kind of the core of who I am and what I do is I want to remind everybody that when you share your story, you change lives. It can be any part of your story. It can be your whole story. It can be, but you change lives with your story. And that's why I do what I do.
Yeah, that's brilliant. First of all, simplify. Um, just to expand upon that, because what I heard you say in your story, and it did come out in spades across the story, but the cool thing about it is it really distills down into breaking it down, building your bridge, what I call your bridge from the future, one brick at a time. And you stay in motion. Take action, because when you say overwhelm and overcomplicated, what that translates into, right, is the anxiety of trying to envision doing something you haven't even started, or trying to do the whole thing. And you use the metaphor, which is a fine metaphor. And many entrepreneurs, artists, people look at the mountain ahead, right? And they say, it's too big, I can't climb that. Well, you can climb the next step and the next step and the next step. So one of the things when I work with my clients, it's the same thing. I say, get in motion, find one thing you can do, even if it's one thing that you learn about your, writing your story. This is the one thing, and breaking it down. That's brilliant. And then the other thing is, absolutely, your story matters. The point is, nobody can argue with your story. You can tell somebody, hey, you need to do this or you need to do that or whatever, but you can't argue with my testimony, my story, where I've been, what I've come, where I've come, what I found, right? And that's another warrior message that every warrior needs to realize, is your story is yours. And if you're not sharing it, you're doing the world a disservice. So whether you share it in a screenplay or a book or a song, or from the stage or from a podcast, it doesn't matter. What the point is, your story matters. And I love that. Well, let's, the last thing I gotta know, I'll leave the audience with, is besides obviously they can find Tammy Gross in the Be Connected platform, and we're going to work with you on getting that your presence there more built out. It's an amazing opportunity. It's not social media, it's social business, which is quite different. Nobody trusts media these days. Other people are in control of your message. You mentioned something already about all of a sudden finding out on Google you were gone. Well, because they changed the algorithm. The thing is SEO, those kinds of things. That's not
Google algorithms.
That's not, we have algorithms and Be Connected, but it's not that. It's basically you can find people you're looking for, and you can get to people you're looking for, and they're not, Big Brother isn't, trying to figure out a way to make you pay so that I can see you. That's not what, and we all live with that, right? But that's it. So tell me, how else can we stay in touch with you, Tammy? And then we're going to have to land the plane.
Well, I'm going to keep it simple. You can just go to, well, it should be simpler actually, because I do realize Scriptpreneur is hard for some people. And I'm
me,
so
are you dissing me here, Tammy? No, I have trouble saying it.
I haven't heard anybody not have trouble. So it's like so dumb. It's kind of like when you use the word entrepreneur in your business, it's like nobody can spell it. So, but hey, it's what we do. So scriptpreneur.com will get you to me. It'll get you to where you can see some of the books that I have or that are coming out. I actually have 2 more that I have to get listed on there that are coming out soon. And one of them is on mindset. And so that's just the easiest thing. Scriptpreneur.com. And if you have trouble pronouncing and it comes out Scriptpreneur, I'm pretty sure that if you put a little E in there, it'll still get you to scriptpreneur.com, because I bought both domains.
Well, we'll get it right.
Scriptpreneur and Scriptpreneur.
Yeah, we'll get it right. We'll put it in the show notes for the podcast, and both audio and on the YouTube channel, and we'll put that actual, so it'll be a link that you can click on, but we'll make sure. But for those listening, it'll be in the show notes. And the other way they'll be able to, I mentioned earlier, but just to repeat, in that we're going to do a mastermind where we're going to talk about with our network community and whatever, and Be Connected community. We're going to talk about how do we craft the story, how do we whatever you're going to focus us on there, which will be 90 minutes of brilliance, I'm sure. So anyway, thank you. I appreciate you, Tammy. Thanks. I'm glad we connected. I'm glad you've weathered the storm of all kinds of illnesses, and you even did with the old Rona thing, which I've had. That's always fun. But I'm glad you're looking great, and I'm sure this is going to be a blessing to a lot of folks. But
thank you. I really appreciated being on this and talking with you. And yes, we have a lot in common, so it just seemed like a natural pair up for us to be talking about these things.
That's great. Well, for those that are on this journey with us, we've come to an end. We're going to hear the outro of It's Not the Getting There. And we'll be back next week at 11 a.m. Central, and I'll talk with another warrior on Warrior versus Zombie.